listen, you guys can't do this stuff house, and when you do it, you clean up. Snorting this cocaine, got this cocaine around the house laying all around. They can bust me with that stuff, it falls on me, So, yeah, I think that Simpson has done a lot of drugs, and Simpson allegedly told CJ that he introduced Nicole to using cocaine, That,
but what about drug dealing? Are there allegations of Simpson and Al Cowling being involved in major drug dealing?
Yep, I suspect that may be associated with a lot of this. I don't have any evidence any more than they have, but factor analysis suggests that people in Southern California felt quite free to enjoy cocaine, because after the CIA turned its head and allowed the Nicaraguan Contras to come in and bring in large shipments of cocaine, in which one of the major distributors of cocaine in California that had a major network that stretched across the United States was a black fellow named Freeway Rick Ross. And if you remember, the guy who wrote about the CIA Contra connection and Freeway Rick Ross connection, he was associated with the San Jose Mercury News. All of a sudden, he gets killed on his doorstep,
Very familiar with those stories. And who went on to defend some of those big drug gangs? What's his name? The prosecutor.
A prosecutor that went on to
Darden. Yeah, Darden went on now in his practice after the OJ trial. He went on to defend those guys who were the head Crips, not the Crips, the Bloods, who was a Death Row Records investor and stuff like that, who was involved with Freeway, Rick Ross. Right?
Yeah.
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 That's a connection.
Ricky Ross was a supplier of all of the gangs. He supplied the Bloods and the Crips, So he was a major. In fact, I remember reading where Freeway Rick Ross went to prison at Terre Haute Federal Penitentiary, and he said that CIA came there and got him out and said, we need you back on the street, because he had his organization generated about $1 million a day, so it's $365 million a year. We need you back on the street. In fact, he's got a life sentence, but they turned it around to where they reduced it, and I think that he got out. He must have got out last year in 2013. He was, they had him down here over in the federal facility in Fort Worth, Texas. But I remember when they arrested him, I was in L.A. at the time that they arrested him down in Riverside, and thought he was gone for life. But I think that whole thing, that CIA connection thing was such an embarrassment that they just had to cut some deal and say, listen, go sit down, be quiet for a while, and after 10 years we're going to come get you,
Right.
And that's kind of the way I think that's gone. But yes, while we were out there, doing our investigation, I remember one of our people had a boat he lived on over in Marina del Rey, and the boat next to him was a big, gigantic boat parked in the harbor there was one that Suge Knight and them used, and I remember him telling me how Freeway Rick Ross had all of these people, these connections over here in Marina del Rey, which is kind of an exclusive area, and the people was selling drugs all throughout the expensive high-rises, and that Freeway Rick Ross had a connection to the people up in Brentwood as well. So, and that was like 10 years ago. So when I hear about those things, it just doesn't surprise me that when the price of cocaine was reduced to such a low level to where people just felt that they had the freedom to be able to use it and it's nothing, it's just like nose candy and everything, you know. I think, yes, there's probably a lot of people who were quietly involved in it making a lot of money. In fact, if you look at the motion picture Training Day is based upon that individual that you see in my documentary. You remember the guy in the documentary named Rafael Perez?
No, I don't. I had trouble watching the documentary. I had to keep hitting pause and I was having, yeah, go ahead.
Well, when if you go back through it again, you'll see, because we took advantage of it. We had kind of an interfamilial battle going on between myself and some of the other lawyers associated with our organization, and Brother was kind of the mediator because they wanted to go back to Texas and challenge the judge in Texas. And I said, that judge is just going to find you in contempt and keep kicking your butt. I said, we don't gain anything filing this lawsuit in Lubbock, Texas. What we tossed the dice. We were hoping to be able to quietly go into San Angelo, Texas, and look at the phone records and come on out and then make a big deal. But that judge stopped us. Right. Okay, so let's leave it alone. I said, eventually something has got to happen, and whatever happens, we need to file that case in California. The reason that we filed it in Texas is because when I got O.J. Simpson to finally sign the contract, the agreement that allowed OMIG, our organization, to bring our attorney in to pursue these records for, he flipped on me the night that he signed the agreement and I said, well, we need to get our attorney and we need to draft the pleading and file this in California as soon as possible. He said, no, you can't file it in California. And I said, why not? He said, if you file it in California, I'll lose all of the credibility that I have left. And I said, well, what credibility are you speaking of? I said, here's Gloria Allred pouring gasoline on hot coals, threatening to take your children away. So I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And so he kind of got pissed off and said, if you file that in California, all bets are off. You can't file it here. And so, you know, I went back to Minneapolis and sat down with my legal think tank, and we tried to figure it out. He won't let us file it in California. We got this signed agreement, but he doesn't want it to be filed. So that's when we figured out that we could file what was called a petition to perpetuate testimony down in San Angelo, Texas. But that judge kicked us out of Texas in 1999. So in 2000, my brother faxed over, come across my fax machine, that this guy, Rafael Perez, who was with the crash unit of the Los Angeles Police Department, and he had gotten busted coming out of the police evidence room with 8 pounds of cocaine. And so they put him on trial, and he was scheduled to go to state prison for between 12 and 20 years. And he told his attorney after the first trial he sweated bullets and he got a hung jury. He says, I can't afford to go through that no more. You got to get me a deal. And he says, well, what do you mean? He says, we'll beat him again, you know. He says, no, I can't take chance because they're waiting for me up there. And he said, well, what do you mean waiting for you? He says, you know, he says, I've been responsible for framing a lot of guys, and they'll be waiting for me when I come into prison. He said, I guess his attorney says, well, maybe we can get you at a more minimal security prison. He said, how many people are you talking about? He says, hundreds. And so his attorney brought the deal to the, I guess, the federal prosecutors and so forth, that this guy, Rafael Perez, that you will see in the documentary, he admits to framing 500 innocent individuals by planting evidence on them, and that he was willing to testify on 11 other officers that was associated with the crash unit, which was that anti-gang strike force unit of the LAPD, that had planted drugs on as many as 2,500 individuals.
Did you
and
know?
So so once they went and they asked OJ, well, what do you think about this guy Perez and what he's saying? And he's in the L.A. Times. It says OJ says from Ramparts to Rockingham. The crash unit was part of the Rockingham precinct and the Rockingham, the Rampart precinct and the Rampart scandal. And so what I'm telling you is that, I even think it's shaky that in 2001 is the only year that I can remember who won the Academy Awards. Denzel Washington won the Academy Award for the crumpiest movie I ever seen, which is Training Day.
Well, dude, listen to this, man. Denzel Washington got his career in show business started. He was in a play called Raisin in the Sun, and you know who financed that play? Who produced that play?
Who?
The guy who I'm talking to you about, who he was a Blood. He funded Death Row Records, and his
you're talking about Harry O.
Man, there you go, Harry O. And his lawyer was Chris Darden.
Okay. Well, when was Harry O? When was Chris Darden representing Harry O?
When Harry O was in prison, trying to get out after his conviction.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
As a matter of fact, he was one of Chris Darden's first clients when Chris Darden left the prosecutor's office.
You kidding me?
No, I'm not kidding you, man. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Well, check this out.
Go ahead.
Chris Darden was also a patient of my brother's.
Oh my God! Well, it's a small world.
And he was and check this out. He was a patient of my brother's at the same time OJ was a patient of my brother.
Wow. So OJ was a patient of your brother. How?
OJ was a patient of my brother because it works like this here. There was a retired nurse who was at the Martin Luther King Hospital in Los Angeles when my brother came there to do his internship and his residency. And she protected all of the African American doctors because the white administrators were always pulling something to try to knock them out of the box. And so she threw her arm around them and said, well, you're not going to mess with these. These are my guys here. And they recognize this woman, and they take care of her. She got all kind of expensive jewelry once these doctors get out and practice, Her name was Irma Reed. So Irma had retired, but she still had that motherly thing going on, so she started writing to O.J. while he was incarcerated in the county jail after, he got arrested.
Okay.
So O.J. adopted Irma as his surrogate mother down in L.A. And Irma would come and call my brother. She would come get her physical at my brother's medical clinic. So apparently she had called my brother and she said, well, doctor, what are you doing? What's going on? And he says, well, we're involved with an investigation concerning O.J. Simpson, and I'm having problems getting an attorney and first one thing and the other. Or we're having a problem filing these documents because my brother, meaning me, has told him you don't have standing. That's what the judge is telling you. Now, maybe somebody in the Simpson family has standing. If we could put their name at the top of the documents that we have, we would have something. But you filing a lawsuit saying that the taxpayers are going to lose a lot of money if this stuff is ever exposed and so forth, they're going to be liable and on the hook. They don't care anything about that because taxpayer lawsuits were struck down by the Supreme Court as far back as 1925. So you don't have any standing, so they throw it out on summary judgment. So he told Irma this, and Irma hadn't told him then that she was the surrogate mother of O.J. So the next Sunday she called O.J., and she called my brother, and she arranged a conference call, and she says, OJ, I want you to meet Dr. Johnson. He's got something important to share with you. And Dr. Johnson, this is O.J. Simpson. Now, I got a pot of beans I got to go deal with. You two talk. And that's how my brother met O.J. And then after he began to visit with O.J. and share with O.J. what he had, my brother began to treat some of the afflictions. O.J. suffers from arthritis, so his knees and his other stuff swells up. And, you know, my brother has to wrap it, treat it, pull the pus or the fluid off of his knees and off of his elbows. So, you know, O.J. trusts my brother in that way, like you would trust any doctor that gives you relief. So at the time that by the time he met Chris Darden, he had been dealing with O.J. for 2 years. And the way that he met Chris Darden is that his secretary knew Chris Darden previously, one of his secretaries, and then she went to a book signing or something when Chris Darden came out with that book, In Contempt. And Chris Darden saw her and became infatuated with her and then, you know, wanted to be with her and all that kind of stuff. So she was with him, and he said, I need a doctor, so she introduced him to my brother. And Chris was sharing a lot of information, you know, how he felt, and first one thing and the other. And he had bought a new house, and he'd have him and my brother be sitting around the new house about 3 or 4 blocks from my brother's house, you know. And he called me one night. I was in his car. Had taken a Chinese lady to dinner and had delivered her back to her home in Chinatown, and I get this call on my phone. My brother says, come up here to this house in Upper Ladera. And I knew who he was talking about because he told me that Chris Darden had just bought a house in Upper Ladera. So when I get off the freeway at Slauson, instead of going straight to my brother's house, I make a right and come back into the area they call Upper Ladera, which is elevated, overlooking the La Cienega, and back off towards the ocean area. And I come knock on the door, and here it was, Chris Darden, you know. I wanted to get into some questions with him, but I could see that he kind of wore his emotions on his sleeves, you know. And I guess it would be later on in the year he kind of fell out with my brother behind 2 things. He impregnated the secretary, and then he didn't want to acknowledge that the child was his, and that ends up popping out in the National Enquirer and all that, you know.
I didn't see that, okay.
Yeah, and then in the midst of all that, my brother was trying to tell him, he said, listen, you got a beautiful child by this woman. You know, you should slow it down. The woman isn't asking you for anything other than to take care of the medical bills of the child, you know. And, you know, Chris is kind of nutty, you know. You know, she's a slut, she's a this, she's a that, first one thing and the other, you know. And I remember the woman calling me in Minneapolis asking me, she said, well, Chris Darden keeps wanting to have sex with me, but he wants to have unprotected sex. Do you think I should do it? And I said, well, you're a grown woman, and he's a grown man. I said, that's something that you two should decide. I'm not going to tell you whether you should. I said, why are you asking me that? And she says, well, you know, you're like my brother, you know. I said, well, your brother's just told you what I think. I said, well, y'all are over 30 years old, so if you decide to have sex with him unprotected, that's between you and him. Well, they did, and she got pregnant, and that's his child. Child is named Tiffany. That baby should be about 15 years old now, you know.
And he has nothing to do with that child?
What?
He has nothing to do with that child?
No, I know he's got to have something to do with that child because he kept clowning and, you know, really making a public scene. I mean, it was all in the tabloid magazines. That was him launching these attacks and stuff.
Really?
And so finally it caused her to have to go get an attorney, and she went and got Gloria Allred. And so when she got Gloria Allred went to lunch with Chris Darden's attorney and got the court to make him pay for her client's lunch as well as his lawyer. And she charged him $15,000 for that luncheon meeting.
Yeah, she's very good, yeah.
Yeah, so
she has a way.
So with that said and done, my brother had said to Chris, he said, listen, man, why are you doing that? He says, man, you're going to end up spending $100,000 screwing around with this situation with Gloria Allred and them when you can just go ahead on and you and Mickey get your head together and settle on, you know, what she needs to take care of this child. And then he said something like, you know, fuck it, that's your child. That ain't my child. That's your child, or some bullshit like that. So my brother said, okay, well, Chris, you know, I'm just done with you, you know.
Right.
And then the next time I guess they had a meeting was after one of those shows that you might have seen my brother on in the documentary. And, you know, Chris has been the advocate at some point in time. That's how I think that he was able to make some money, is because at first he wanted to be liked by the African-American community, and they wasn't having it too well, you know. They didn't see him like that. They saw him as a villain because that's the narrative that had been drawn. So I think somebody came and told Chris, hey, man, you need to flip the script and you can get paid. So Chris, even though he got what I consider to be the lowest advance, I think they paid him like $1.5 million advance. I think his book sold better than all of the rest of them.
And he's nowhere now. You don't see him anywhere.
You don't see what?
You don't see him on TV anywhere. They still pull out Marcia Clark, and she has like 10 different books, I guess, written by...
Marcia's an opportunist, a hustler, hustler. I don't even think that Marcia really wanted to be a lawyer too much. She'd been a dancer and everything else, you know, and she went to Israel and got raped when she was a teenager and all that kind of. So I think she just got some issues, you know, and you look at her, she's been getting them damn Botox shots in the face and stuff like that. Her face looked like a China doll half the time. She looks kind of weird.
Now, what about the story about Marcia Clark? She's a member of the Church of Scientology.
I don't know nothing about all of that, man.
Well, okay, now, you know that the pastor that married her to her husband shot her ex-husband.
I remember hearing something about that, you know.
And that ex-husband used to play poker with O.J. Simpson.
Really?
Yeah.
That was the gambling husband. I know she was married to a gambler, supposedly.
Yeah, and the story is that he was at a weekly poker game with O.J. Simpson and owed O.J. money during the time of the trial.
Really?
Yeah.
During the time of the trial?
Yeah.
Oh, you mean owed him past debts? So.
Yeah, he owed money.
Yeah. Well, you know, you got, you know, everybody has got something significant. You got some interesting stuff, man, you know, and you don't know all of it. And I'm always surprised when somebody brings me a nuance of new stuff relative to you know, this O.J. Simpson thing.
Yeah, because, but you think this story, though, is like a sort of a big mind control for the nation, to hypnotize the nation to have a certain kind of outcome, a racist outcome, I believe, correct?
Well, I think it has been used in that manner. Now, why it's been used, we can't figure that out. You know, the one thing that it has seemed to be effective is that if you what I've seen to see, if you, what I've seen to see, is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I've seen to see is that if you, if you, what I' and now I'm talking from a subjective standpoint because I prefer to stay objective, but and I think I say in my book I will venture off into the subjective in that I have always wondered, why did you do this? If this thing is a total fraud regarding O.J. Simpson based upon a bunch of erroneous, trumped-up evidence and much of it that you're continuing to conceal, and this prosecutor, we don't even know where he took all of the exhibit evidence that he took out of the case file. But if you did all of this stuff and you got all of this stuff going on, what was the reason behind it? Why did you do this here? It almost seems to me like it was an experiment, okay, that if we're going to see what type of effect that generating racial animus can have in terms of being able to control the minds of the people. If it proves to be a valuable tool, then we have something that we can use in the future, okay? Now, that's what I was thinking about as far back as 1998, 1999, 2000, and bam, we had this thing hit on 9/11.
Okay.
2001, okay. And I said, okay, wow, look at this. And then, you know, I don't put that with O.J. Simpson right there. But then we come
up. But there are connections, you know.
We come up the line about, I would say, maybe maximum 6 weeks, but I think it was more like 4 weeks after the 9/11 planes ran into the towers. I'm sitting here and I'm watching Jay Leno. I usually like to watch just the first 10 minutes because he's funny. He's doing his monologue. After that, I got to turn to something else. So I had this habit of, let me catch Jay Leno, you know, at 10:30. I'll listen to his monologue for about 10 minutes and then move on. So this particular night, I'm listening to him, and he makes this joke about Osama bin Laden. Right. Now, nobody really knows what Osama bin Laden looks like at this time, okay? We've just been hearing the name Osama bin Laden, and Osama bin Laden had denied initially that he was responsible for doing the bombings. You know, that was the first thing. But then the people said, no, Osama bin Laden, Osama bin Laden. So then I guess Osama bin Laden said, well, you know, since they're going to blame me, I might as well just go head on and accept it, you know. So everything became centered around Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, okay? But nobody really, if they put Osama bin Laden up on a screen, nobody would have been able to tell you that this was Osama bin Laden from Captain Kangaroo, you know. But on this night that Jay Leno was making this joke about how can these people catch Osama bin Laden, they can't even catch O.J. Simpson, you know. Right. However he said it, you know, it was structured in a way to make people laugh. But the people gave him kind of a half-hearted laugh on it. But what was fascinating to me is that while he was telling the joke, someone had superimposed the image of Osama bin Laden and O.J. Simpson together. And they were on Mujahideen. O.J. had on a Mujahideen attire and they put a beard on him, etc., you know. And I said, wow, look at that. Look at that. I said, now, there's already animosity that has still been simmering on the back burner regarding O.J. Simpson. Now, these individuals have been able to transfer that anger of somebody that the society, at least a large part of the society, feels in their mind and in their heart is a murderer. And now they're able to associate that individual with this individual who they claim is this mass murderer. And believe it or not, there were similarities in the look of Osama bin Laden and the look of O.J. Simpson.
The mugshot, yeah.
Yeah, they have a similarity in terms of their facial structure. And so I noticed those things. I said, now, and the interesting thing is I have that tape because by that time I was compiling what I was going to structure, how I was going to structure this documentary. And I had gotten the tape from VMS, Video Monitoring Service, out of their branch out of Chicago. But when they sent me the tape with Jay Leno doing the joke, the superimposed image of Osama bin Laden and O.J. Simpson wasn't on the tape. So I called him and I said, well, thank you for sending me this tape with the joke and so forth, but where is the image of Osama bin Laden and O.J. Simpson? They said, there is no image of Osama bin Laden and O.J. Simpson. We get this from the closest point to it coming from the broadcast studio before it's uplinked to satellite. So, I said, well, is there another explanation? I mean, and every explanation that they gave me, they said no. So the only thing that I could come up with is that somebody downline decided that they would superimpose the image at the time that Jay Leno was telling the joke.
Wow.
So I don't know how to explain that, but that night on my television, on my network, and I think Jay Leno was on NBC, when that show aired and so forth, it was my assumption that not only did the joke go around the United States to millions of people, but that image of Osama bin Laden and O.J. Simpson together, and that was a powerful subliminal message.
Well, Thomas, do you know that there's a direct connection to the O.J. Simpson trial to the 9/11 hijacking?
No, I didn't know that.
James Woods.
What about him? The actor?
The actor James Woods, who is an extremely intelligent guy. He's a genius. And he was at the O.J. Simpson trial. He attended the trial. When Judge Ito saw him, he invited him back to chambers. They had a discussion.
Okay.
A week before the 9/11 hijackings, James Woods was on a plane, and he reports, and he testified, and he reported this to the FBI. He was interviewed by the FBI, that he saw a practice run of Arab gentlemen trying to do standing up and doing awkward things on the plane, and he saw them acting strange in first class, and he says, wow, this is a rehearsal for a hijacking. Let me report this to the FBI.
Okay.
Now, he tells that story, on, Tonight Show and all that kind of stuff like that, that he's a witness to this hijacking rehearsal.
Okay.
He's the only source for that.
Okay.
He's a trusted source because we know who he is and stuff like that, so we kind of believe his story.
Right, right.
We can prove he was on the plane. Did he really see this? Were there really 19 hijackers? I don't know. I don't know if I believe any of that stuff.
Okay.
But there is that connection there between the O.J. trial and the 9/11 hijacking story.
Okay. Because of Woods going into the judge's chambers with Ito?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, let's call that an indirect connection, I'll accept that. But there's some other types of connections that are more fascinating.
Okay, what do you got?
I don't know. I don't know right off the top of my head. I have to go back into the one thing that we didn't get to, which I try to figure out why Cochran would go along with this thing.
Yeah.
Now, remember, I told you that it's the same reason that I don't want to do anything on this Las Vegas thing right now until I have the evidence in hand that shows that Galanter was in the parking lot or whatever, I don't like to put stuff out there, just put it out on the airways, because this stuff is so sensitive that people want to come over the top. They want to sue you. They want to do this and they want to do that. Even though they can't win the case, you got to come up with money to go defend yourself on some craziness, you know. But when you got that empirical evidence that shows that, hey, man, you got some explaining to do, okay? Now, when that was another thing that came up out of those filing of the phone records, somebody came back on the internet and says, well, didn't Johnny Cochran stipulate to those phone records as well in July? And man, that internet, that was one of the most valuable areas of information, was that discussion and heated arguments going on between the pro-Jays and the no-Jays. You told me the name of it. It was like, what was it, Alt-Fan OJ or something?
Yeah, well, there was a bunch, on Usenet. There was a bunch of them. Alt-OJ, Alt-No-J, Alt-OJ,
right.
Pro-J.
Right.
There was like 10 of them.
Right. But the fascinating thing about it is that I was always able to find that it was always somebody in the group that really was dropping subtle hints. It was
right,
like,
and all those archives are gone now. They're all gone forever.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of that stuff. We downloaded a lot of it, so we have it. I have it in file cabinets in 3 states. You know,
great stuff. Yeah.
But that's whenever I would pick up on something subtle like that, I would go back to source and I'd say, listen, can you pull the tape? I'd go back. I tell you, one of the great sources. I don't know if you're acquainted with him or not, but the guy that put the transcript of the trial on the internet, the Dutchman. Are you acquainted with the Simpson criminal case transcript website?
Yeah, I am. His name was the Dutchman, right? That was his nickname.
Yeah, he's the Dutchman, but I was trying to call his name. It's I want to say Van something, or Dutchmen usually have Van something in their name.
Yeah, I do remember all that. Yeah, I haven't really gotten into this in a long time.
But anyway, I thought that at one point in time, once we came on the scene pretty heavy and was delivering certain things, that they said, well, they must be getting a lot of this stuff, access to these transcripts from his site. So they try to shut his site down. The L.A. Superior Court or somebody says, well, these documents belong to us. They are proprietary documents that belong to us. You can't post them on the internet. But somehow or the other, he was able to get his site back up, and it has been valuable. It has been invaluable to us because, like I said, I had the source who was equally as invaluable, that had the videotapes. And so I would go to the transcript website, and he had everything indexed on the transcript website. So if I punched in Johnny Cochran,
right,
blah blah blah, and then it give you the dates to Johnny Cochran. So here it is.
Is that still available or no? It's gone.
Yeah, still available, man. Still available.
Anyway, when you look up Pelicano in the sidebars, okay. Because Anthony Pelicano, the private investigator who's in prison right now for having a C4 and wiretapping everybody in Hollywood, okay?
I remember the allegations against him and that, yep.
Right. See, now he was working for Bill Clinton at the time, digging up dirt on Monica Lewinsky. My understanding is that O.J. Simpson played golf with Bill Clinton about 2 weeks before the murder or 2 months before the murder.
He could have.
Okay, yeah. So it seems to me, and there's a lot of talk about maybe that O.J. had hired Pelicano. Pelicano was a thug known to be going around slashing tires and stuff like that. But the thing is, when Pelicano's name came up at the sidebar, everybody involved, Marsha Clark, Darden, Cochran, and Ito, all said, oh, we don't want to mess with Pelicano. We're not going to say his name. We don't want to talk about him.
They didn't want him on the stand, huh?
They didn't want to piss him off.
They didn't want to piss him off.
Yeah. Well, the guy was working for Bill Clinton, man, at the time. He was wiretapping everybody, had dirt on everybody in town. You know,
it was really strange how a lot of that stuff was going on. I don't know. Another book I finished a couple of years ago was by Bill Woz.
Right.
Okay. And if you ever get a chance,
I didn't know Woz wrote a book, but I know the Woz story.
No, Woz wrote a book, man. And before I could get to interviewing him, he winds up dead.
Oh, he's dead.
Yeah, here it is, right here.
Well, came the guy
Kardashian. Yep.
Kardashian hired Woz. Now, let me ask you a question. Now, have you ever pulled up? Now, Cindy Garvey testified in the O.J. trial, right?
That's what I understand. Yep.
No, but have you ever pulled up her divorce?
No.
Oh my God, man! You got to look at that. When she was filing divorce against Steve Garvey,
okay,
she made all kinds of accusations, man. I think she brought up O.J.'s name in that divorce, but
right.
Bruce Jenner and all these guys, she named all their names and said they were all involved in drug dealing.
Right. And yep.
I'd love to get a hold of those divorce pleadings.
Well, I don't know how you would do that, but I mean, you do your homework, and you may very well get that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
The thing about it is, I'm not surprised. I may look that up and check it out. Bill Woz wrote a book called "We Only Kill Our Friends," and what it seemed like is that he doesn't talk a whole lot about being hired by Kardashian, but there's plenty of information that came up that Kardashian hired him, and Kardashian may very well have been instrumental in them people getting killed. But he had tried to hire this guy, Bill Woz, to execute Nicole and he turned it down, you know.
Right.
So what happens to him, I think because the police wind up finding all of this stuff in his vehicle, when they put him on trial for, I think, armed robbery or something, they decide that they're going to really, stick it to him. So they send him down there in the desert where it's 120 degrees at Calipatra prison, which the way he tells the story, it was like a gladiator type of situation there, where they were trying to kill him, and he was able to survive it and get through his sentencing and finally get transferred back to Kern Valley, back up north and so forth, where it was a little cooler, and he tried to just keep his head down and do his time, without getting shipped back down there. But he talks about the fights that the guards would arrange that he'd have to fight in and all of that kind of stuff, and how there was a lot of blood letting down there in that prison and so forth at Calipatra. So you can just see something doesn't make sense in terms of why you're going to send this guy to a level 4 prison when he basically had whatever the charges were against him. In my opinion, it did not warrant him being automatically sent to a level 4 prison. That's like they were sending him there to be executed. And so now the guy gets out of prison, and then I read in the news that this guy gets killed on his outside of his apartment over, I think he was in the area right off from the L.A. airport there, El Segundo. I think he was in the El Segundo area, right near the airport. So that was real strange, But
wait, how did he get killed? How did he get killed?
I think he got shot. They found him shot to death.
And no,
it was almost like predictable, you know.
Yeah,
like
right,
yeah. They gotta get rid of this guy. He's a loose factor here. If Kardashian was involved, we got to get rid of this guy. Okay, I think all of these guys, the strangeness of their deaths coming at relatively young ages. Even Johnny Cochran,
right.
As we're pressing Johnny Cochran, we need to talk to you, man. When people see my film, this documentary that you're looking at, I didn't want to screen it in California first because I had put too much time and energy, and I said, okay, I got stuff in here that people are going to be crying, copyright infringement and stuff.
Right.
I want it out, but I need to be on the East Coast and then come back this way. Well, my brother said, no, I want to. Let's do it. Let's do a private screening out here. So we had a private screening of about 200 people at the Raleigh theaters, at the Charlie Chaplin Theater, which was part of the Raleigh Studios across the street from Paramount Studios. And O.J. Simpson's sister was there, Shirley and her family, and this lady from the Pan-African Film Festival. She was the administrator, the assistant administrator to the executive director, So I edited the film so many times, I never watched the film so much. I watched the people. I want to see how the people react to certain areas of the film that I put together, So once the film ends, I'm coming down the stairway from the booth that the guy in the projection room is in, and these two women are crying and exchanging tissue paper, So the one lady says, my brother says, well, I want you to meet O.J. Simpson's sister, Shirley Simpson Baker, and I met her, and then the other lady, she introduced herself. She says, I'm so-and-so and so-and-so. She said, we got to have this film in the Pan-African Film Festival. And that's the first time that I had heard of that film festival, but it was the largest black film festival in the world at the time, and it's headquartered out in Los Angeles. And so this was the 13th annual Black Pan-African Film Festival. So I don't know, and then my younger brother, he got into it, and he was friends with the executive director, and he says, I'm going to have the executive director call you. So the executive director called me, and I told him about my concerns and this and that. He says, yeah, we get that. He said, but I can pretty much assure you, you're not going to have a problem. So I caved in, and I let it happen out at the Pan-African Film Festival. And the day that I was to catch a flight was on the worst flying day of the year in February, when the kids are out for spring break, for that President's Day break. And I'm flying. I worked for Northwest Airlines as well, so, I flew for free around the country. But you get bumped if a paying customer is going to. Couldn't get on a flight that day. So my brother, he has to take over for me at the film festival and give the speech and everything else. So I called him later that night to say, well, how did it go? I couldn't catch the last flight that would have gotten me there, it's going to get me there late. So I just decided to go home. So he says, man, you wouldn't believe it. He said, after your film screen, the people would not leave the auditorium. They got up and started protesting that we got to get some answers. Says something is going on here. We're not leaving until we get some answers. And so a couple of people said, we know Johnny Cochran. We cater for him at his different parties. We're going to confront him and find out what is going on here. Okay, because if you remember in the film, I have Johnny Cochran, admitting that he knew about those telephone records as well. And do you remember a section in the documentary where, when it gets to Cochran's, he's in the middle of a 352 argument where he's arguing the prejudicial versus the probative value of them showing the jury those bloody murder photographs. And in it he says, Your Honor, we don't need to show the jury these bloody murder photographs. They're so gory. All they do is upset the jury. And so they're more prejudicial than they are probative. So all they need to do is say this, say 656 is this photograph and 654 is a photograph of Ron Goldman. But we don't need to show the jury these bloody photographs. After all, Your Honor, we're not going to show them other evidence in the case. We decided that we are not going to show them the telephone records or whatever. And then I run that back 3 times.
Wow.
We're not going to show them telephone bills or whatever. Then I run it back again. We're not going to show them the telephone bills or whatever. That clip was one of the promotional trailers that I had on YouTube. For the first years that I put it up on YouTube, that clip ran away from the rest of them. It ran away so far from the rest of them that all of a sudden it's like it hit a stone wall. And then somebody had been able to get to YouTube and tell them that you need to make people prove that they're 18 years old before they can sign in to see this.
Wow.
And I said, what the hell is going on? There's more gorier bullshit on YouTube than this clip here. I said, yeah, you see Ron Goldman on the ground, you see Nicole Brown Simpson laying in blood, but man, this stuff on YouTube that's really off the hook. It doesn't have this obstruction. This is why this thing, you see your stuff blowing through, you're getting 1,000, is 100 today, 100 tomorrow, 100, 100, 100, 100, and then all of a sudden it just starts slowing down, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I found out, bam, it's got all of this stuff attached to it, where a person, if they want to see it, they've got to come in and type in how old they are and all of this kind of stuff, and then click this button. I said, now, I don't know who in the heck was able to get this put on my site, but this is what's killed it. So I uploaded it again, and it has never, it's up now to about 24,000, but it's just, kind of struggled along, but when I pulled it down years ago, it had gone to 30,000 before the rest of them even had come to 20,000. The others was like in the 15,000 category, and it was at 30 when this came up, And now, the one that really gains speed right now, and I don't know the fascination with it, but I think it's going to hit 100,000 this in the next few months here, is the one about Ron Goldman that I have. But 6 years ago, that wasn't a popular clip from my documentary. So it's just a bunch of interesting stuff that goes with this thing. What I was going to say to you about Cochran is that once I found out that Cochran knew about these telephone records and he concealed the thing here, I started, well, why would he do that? Why wouldn't he? Because if we deal with it from a racial standpoint, the first thing that white people will say, well, Johnny Cochran, he would never allow anything like that. Well, Johnny Cochran always became the shield that they could stand behind to be able to say, Johnny Cochran, he's not going to let that go down, Well,
let me just say this, because if Johnny Cochran really was, which he was at one time, man, he was the guy doing all the police brutality cases in L.A., but they must have got to him. Because if he really was that guy, he never would have got a show on court TV.
Well, Johnny Cochran I it come to reason in my mind that the reason why Johnny Cochran did what he did, if he in fact did this,
okay,
and that occurred a couple of years, some years ago. I was in Houston, Texas, to film my daughter's son at a basketball tournament, and I went to stay at my sister's apartment, and it was around my birthday in April, and she says, well, you know, I got a present for you. And she went and she pulled this book off the shelf, and she gave me this book. And the book is entitled Last Man Standing. And the book was written by the lawyer for Geronimo Pratt, Stuart Hanlon, and someone else. And when I got through reading that book, then it seemed to all fall into place in a certain way that Johnny Cochran, you have to remember that Johnny Cochran was the third most powerful individual in the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office for about 2 years. He was the prosecutor. He hired Hodgman. William Hodgman was actually the lead attorney in the O.J. Simpson case.
Right.
And he hired him and made him the head of the Special Investigations Division. And Johnny Cochran hired and gave Judge Ito his first job as a prosecutor, and hired him in the anti-gang strike force unit. And Vanderkamp, who had pleaded with Johnny Cochran to come inside the prosecutor's office. You know, you're handling all of these police brutality cases, but if you want to change the system, you change it from the inside. Johnny sat down and counseled with his father, and his father told him, you know, I think
Did I lose you?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think I lost him. Good stuff, though, right? You're listening to everything, huh? Yeah, we lost you, man.
So once Johnny talked to his father, he decided to join Vanderkamp, and Vanderkamp, you know, he had a shield that said, a gold shield that had the number 3 on it, which was the third most powerful individual behind the DA, and then the assistant chief of staff, who was assistant DA, and then Johnny Cochran was the district attorney over personnel, hiring, and so forth, and making policies and all of that kind of stuff. So Johnny Cochran, Vanderkamp assigned Gil Garcetti, to be Johnny Cochran's adjutant. So Johnny Cochran was over Gil Garcetti. Johnny Cochran hired the lead prosecutor in the Simpson trial, Hodgman, and Johnny Cochran hired the Judge Ito, to his first job as a prosecutor.
Right,
so,
let me interrupt for a second, because Hodgman, now why did Hodgman leave the case? He was going to prosecute the case.
You know, my feeling is that I think if Hodgman was pressed against the wall, because I remember Hodgman, when the federal judge made us go back to the state court to make them put those telephone records back in the case file, and they said, now if this Judge Fiddler doesn't put the telephone records back in the file, then you come back to federal court, okay? And that was in 2000. So the day that we go to court, here's Hodgman. Hodgman is standing in an indention in the wall of the, on the 12th floor where we were getting ready to go in. You know, the bailiffs hadn't called us in yet. So people were milling about out in the hall, and I guess we had about 50 or 60 people who had come downtown with our people, and they were black, white, Hispanic, a lot of people, And so in the midst of all these people standing outside, I see Hodgman, and Hodgman is looking over the group,